Welcome to Spookies and Scaries, where the innocent turns sinister. Tonight's tale is about a doll, but not just any doll. This is the story of the doll that watches. It was a quaint little shop on the edge of town where the Miller family stumbled upon the doll. It sat on the top shelf, slightly dusty, but its porcelain face was pristine, with lifelike eyes that seemed to watch every move. Mrs. Miller was immediately drawn to it. "Look at this one," she called to her husband. "Isn't it perfect for Emily? That one. It's been here for as long as I can remember. No one seems to want it." Despite the cryptic warning, the Millers bought the doll. Wrapped carefully, they took it home, unaware of the malevolent force they were bringing with them. At first, things seemed normal. Emily adored the doll, giving it a name, Annabelle. But after a few days, subtle changes occurred. Emily would leave the doll on the bed, only to find it sitting in a chair when she returned. Emily asked Mom, "Did you move Annabelle?" "No." "Honey, why?" One night, after the house had gone quiet, Mrs. Miller heard faint footsteps coming from the hallway. Thinking it was Emily, she checked her room, but Emily was fast asleep. And yet, the footsteps continued. What she didn't know was that the doll was no longer where Emily had left it. Emily began talking to the doll more and more, but the conversations grew unsettling. Emily whispering, "I won't let them take you away. You're my friend." When Mrs. Miller asked her who she was talking to, Emily replied, "Annabelle. She talks to me at night." The words sent chills down her spine. Mrs. Miller began noticing objects out of place, the kitchen chairs rearranged, drawers pulled opened, and the doll, always sitting somewhere new, its eyes seeming to follow her. It wasn't just a toy anymore. It felt alive. Fearing for their safety, Mrs. Miller decided to lock the doll in a room, hoping it would put an end to the eerie happenings. But that night the sounds grew louder. Heavy footsteps echoed through the house, and the sound of a door creaking open sent shivers down her spine. In the morning, the doll was sitting in the living room. The door to the room had been unlocked. Emily's behavior became erratic. She refused to go anywhere without the doll, claiming it would be lonely without her. She would sit for hours, staring at it, whispering things too faint for her parents to hear. Emily, in a low voice, "You told me they don't believe us, but they will." Her parents didn't know what to do. The once happy little girl was now distant, as if the doll had a hold on her. In desperation, the Millers sought the help of a local psychic. The woman entered their home and immediately froze when she saw the doll. Psychic with a shaky voice, "This is not a doll. It's a vessel. Something dark resides within it." She urged them to get rid of the doll immediately, but it wasn't as easy as they thought. The Millers drove to a remote location to get rid of the doll, throwing it into the woods. They returned home believing they were free of it, but the next morning, the doll was back, sitting on the couch, its eyes glowing in the dark. Emily's voice began to change, no longer sounding like herself. The things she said were beyond her years, with a dark, sinister tone. Emily, with a deep, eerie voice, "They don't want me to leave. We belong here together." Her eyes seemed different, darker, as if something else was looking through her. Terrified, Mrs. Miller confronted the doll, screaming for it to leave her family alone. But as she reached for the doll, it seemed to move on its own, its cold eyes locking onto hers. Emily screamed, "Don't hurt her," and the lights flickered. Desperate for answers, the Millers searched for the doll's origin. They discovered it belonged to a little girl who died under mysterious circumstances. The doll had been her companion, and ever since her death, it was said to harbor her spirit or something darker. One stormy night, Mrs. Miller awoke to the sound of Emily's voice, but it wasn't coming from her room. It was the doll speaking, using her daughter's voice. She found the doll sitting in the living room, illuminated by lightning outside. Emily stood beside it, her face pale, her eyes vacant. Emily whispering, "We can't leave her. She's part of me now." Panicked, Mrs. Miller grabbed Emily and ran upstairs, waking her husband. They fled the house, leaving everything behind. As they rushed out the door, the doll remained on the couch, its eyes glowing in the dark, watching them leave. The Millers never returned to the house. It was sold, left abandoned for years, but the doll remained. Whoever finds it, they say, will face the same terror. So, if you ever come across a doll with lifelike eyes, be careful, for it might just be watching you too. Until next time, stay safe and sleep well.